The average new car sold in America right now costs 51,456 US dollar. In China, that exact same amount of money buys you 5 brand new electric cars, not used, not stripped down. 5 new separate fully built road legal electric vehicles for the price Americans pray for one. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand the real mechanics behind that number, not the surface level explanation everyone repeats, but what is actually happening inside the factories, the supply chains, and the battery plants that makes this possible. Let's start with the number that made people stop scrolling in 2026. China's cheapest mass-produced electric car, the Wuling Hongguang Mini EV, starts at around 6,200 US dollar. The most expensive version, with a bigger battery and more range, still costs in under $7,600. For comparison, no other major car market on earth, I don't know if it is available in other planets, but currently on earth, offers a production electric vehicle below $8,000. Not one. China is not just cheaper, it is operating in a price bracket that right now doesn't exist anywhere on earth. Now, the easy explanation is the one you have probably heard. Cheap labor, government subsidy, and that is it. Story over. But stick with me, because that explanation is actually only a small piece of what is really going on. And once you understand the real mechanism, you will understand why this gap is not closing anytime soon. At least, that is the surface level story most people settle for. If you want the real source explanation, not the 2-sentence version you get from the headline, hit subscribe. This channel breaks down what is actually driving the number behind the auto industry, not just the numbers themselves. After spending more than a year in China and extensively researching the country's booming automotive industry, my team and I break down the stories behind every headline, giving you the facts, context, and insight that are easy to understand. According to the International Energy Agency's 2026 Global EV Outlook, producing a standard gas-powered car already costs 30% less than producing that same car in Germany. And that is before you even get to electric vehicle. Labor is part of that, running roughly 3 to 5 times cheaper than in most advanced countries. But here is the detail almost nobody mentioned. Energy cost. The electricity running the factory itself only make up between 1 and 4% of the car's total manufacturing cost. So cheap Chinese electricity is not actually the real reason your EV is cheap. It is barely a rounding error. The real gap opens somewhere much more specific: the battery. The IEA's report puts it plainly. China's production cost advantage is even greater when it comes to electric cars, specifically because of low battery cost, and that is part of this story that actually matters. China currently produces around 75% of the entire world's lithium-ion battery cells. Companies like CATL and BYD are not just car companies, they are 2 of the largest battery manufacturers on the planet. BYD doesn't buy its battery from an outside supplier the way most automakers do. It builds its own lithium-ion phosphate cell in-house, from raw materials to finished parts inside its own factory. That single decision, controlling the battery instead of buying it, is estimated to save somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 per vehicle, just from cutting out the markup a third-party battery supplier would normally charge. And then there is scale. Some of China's largest EV factories now produce 1 million cars a year, output that dwarfs typical plants elsewhere in the world. When you are building at that volume, every fixed cost, the factory itself, the equipment, the engineering, gets spread across millions of vehicles instead of a few 100,000. That alone drives the per car cost down dramatically. Put all of that together: cheap labor, in-house battery production, massive manufacturing scale, and over a decade of experience running highly automated battery plants and manufacturing efficiency alone account for more than 40% of the battery cost gap between China and Europe. Now, stop and think about what that actually means. This is not one clever trick or one government check. It is 4 or 5 structural advantages stacked on top of each other, all pointing in the same direction. That is not something a competitor fixes with one new factory or one new subsidy program. That is a decade-long head start. And this is showing up in real numbers, not just in theory. Toyota's China-built BZ3X SUV, produced through a joint venture and sourcing around 65% of its parts from Chinese suppliers, sold nearly 70,000 units in its first year and landed among China's top 30 EV model. Meanwhile, Volkswagen's new Audi sub-brand in China, launched without even using the traditional foreign brand, has sold around 1,000 units a month and doesn't crack the top 100. Same country, same market, widely different outcome. The difference is not the badge on the hood. It is how deeply each company has actually plumbed into China's battery and supply chain ecosystem. But here is where the story stops purely being impressive and starts raising other questions. Because subsidies are still very much part of this picture, the Chinese government currently offers buyers up to roughly $2,866 for scrapping an old car and purchasing a new energy vehicle, plus additional trade-in incentive, combined savings that can reach around $5,000 per buyer when stacked with tax reduction. The IEA itself is careful here, noting that general subsidies and preferential financial were instrumental in helping China's EV industry reach its current scale in the first place, and that these policies likely still shape cost structure today, even if they are not the full explanation anymore. This is not a case of the government simply paying the difference forever. It is that state support built the scale, and the scale is now what is generating the savings, which means even if subsidies shrink tomorrow, the structural cost advantage doesn't necessarily disappear with them. So here is the real question: if the core of this cost advantage is not cheap labor or a subsidy check, but control over the battery supply chain itself, built up over more than a decade, what does it actually take from any other country to close that gap? A new factory, a new law, or something closer to starting the last 10 years over again? To be fair, this gap is not necessarily permanent. The IEA is explicit that cost structure can evolve. Other regions could narrow the difference by scaling up their own EV production, building specialized battery clusters, and adopting cheaper battery chemistries like LFP instead of the pricier nickel-based battery still common in Europe and US. This is a lead, not a law of physics, but right now in 2026, nobody else is close to China. And the companies actually closing the gap inside China, like Toyota's joint venture, are the ones doing it by leaning into the Chinese supply chain, not competing against it. If you are watching this outside China, this is worth paying attention to, not just as a car buyer, but as someone watching an entire industry shift. The next car you buy 5 or 10 years from now may well be shaped by decisions Chinese manufacturers made a decade ago, whether the badge on the hood says BYD or not. So do you think the Western automakers can actually close this cost gap? Tell me what you think in the comment section. I read every one of them. This is China EV Show, where we go beyond the headlines to explain the technology, the companies, and the trend shaping the future of the global automotive industry. If you enjoyed this clear, in-depth analysis, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.